Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, wherever you may be joining us from the world. And welcome to our third session on our third day of Artlogic Connect 2024. My name is John Duff, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Artlogic. And you may have seen me on some of the other panels, but if you haven't, and this is the first panel you're joining, welcome. We've had over 3,000 registrations for Connect from over 70 countries. So we just want to give you a little intro of what Connect is all about. For us, it was important to create a space where the art world could come together, give a platform to art world voices and experts, because we all know that the art world thrives on connection, innovation, and shared knowledge. And by coming together, we hope we can tackle some of these challenges, spark some fresh ideas, and really shape a future where the creativity and business flourish hand in hand. For those of you who are new to Artlogic, we are a platform who have been helping to transform the art world for the last 30 years. Since 1994, we partnered with more than 5,000 art businesses, and today we work with more than 12,000 users worldwide to help empower galleries, artists, and collectors to streamline their operations, their sales, and their marketing into one platform. So the business of art can become that little bit more efficient and hopefully help art businesses to grow everywhere. This session, Art Everywhere, Rethinking Sustainability and the Logistics in the Global Art Scene, is where our panel will share their insights and explore innovative solutions that will help your art business thrive and champion sustainability in the creative community. This session will include a panel discussion that's going to last about 30 to 45 minutes, and then we're going to have 15 minutes for a Q&A section at the end. So if you do have a question that comes to your mind during this time, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom. We're going to try and get through as many as possible, but I will warn you, we've had quite a lot of questions coming through. So if you do pop a question in, please also remind that these are public forums, so these questions should be suitable for all audiences. If you do need to step away at any time, don't worry, because you can revisit the conversation later. This session is being recorded, and we're going to send it out to you early next week, and you can watch it on demand at your convenience. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Annabel Keenan, who will guide us through this exciting discussion. Annabel is a New York-based writer and author of an upcoming book on climate action in the art world, to be published on Lund Humphreys and Sotheby's Institute of Art. Her work has been featured in leading publications such as New York Times and the Financial Times. So please join me in welcoming Annabel to the virtual stage.
Thank you, John, and thank you to Artlogic for organizing this conference, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today for this conversation on sustainable logistics in the art world, including shipping, which is an important part of the global industry. As John said, I'm a writer specializing in contemporary art and sustainability, and I've been covering the topic for several years. Today, I'm joined by Cliodhna Murphy, Global Head of Environmental Sustainability at Hauser Wirth, Haley Mellin, artist and founder of the nonprofit land conservation organization Art into Acres, and she's also the co-founder of several other groups, including Artists Commit, Mocha LA's Environmental Council. And finally, I'm joined by Edouard Gouin, CEO and co-founder of Convelio, which is a leading fine art shipping company. Today, we will outline some actionable steps and tips to implement best practices for shipping, such as carbon emission reporting, and highlight a few resources that are available for people trying to understand their own climate impact, like groups such as Gallery Climate Coalition. I understand that many in the audience are coming from commercial galleries, including several registrars. Every employee is important in making sustainable decisions, but registrars are often the ones undertaking the onus to source, understand, and advocate for green options, oftentimes going up against system-wide practices that make this difficult. I hope that the registrars joining us today can take away tips to help them make these sustainable decisions. Many, if not all of the resources we are going to discuss today are publicly available. I also hope that gallery directors and owners joining us today support registrars and every employee in making green decisions, and we'll discuss ways that this can happen later on. As we all know, the Miami Art Fairs are less than 2 weeks away. For those participating, this would be a great time to think of how you can implement green practices in your fair operations. When you're on site, look for fair organizers, look for shippers, ask them what they're doing in terms of sustainability, ask what you as an exhibitor can do to work together to make sustainable choices. And today, as John mentioned, please ask any and all questions. These panelists are experts and have a wealth of knowledge on the topic of sustainability in the art world. With that, I'll start by asking Cliodhna to share a bit about her role as Global Head of Environmental Sustainability at Hauser Wirth. What does your job entail? And can you give us a sense of who you work with at galleries?
Sure. Thank you, Annabel. Well, first and foremost, I spend my days showing, telling, and evidencing in the gallery that change is possible. And there's really several strands to this work, from focusing on industry collaboration to creating a culture of reduction in the gallery. But I guess just a little bit of context behind the scenes. I guess what's important to know about Hauser Wirth is that environmental awareness and biodiversity protection have always been important to the gallery founders, Ivan and Manuela Wirth. And really their viewpoint on the climate crisis is in part shaped by conversations with artists who are taking action themselves. So from Camille Rowe to Rashid Johnson and Pippi Lottie-Rist. But back in 2021, Ivan's introduction to Haley and Art to Acres was really auspicious and evolved into a permanent land conservation and partnership that we've been evolving to this day. And it was really Haley, our introduction to Haley, that where we realized that we needed to develop more global initiatives that are proportional to the gallery's impact. So that's how my role was evolved to really support this ethos. So who do I work at the gallery? And it's really a range of colleagues that I've identified who have developed expertise and knowledge in various areas, because we're really learning in real time. But for example, on shipping, I work very closely with a registrar in London called Poppy Fairfax, who's been really instrumental in our evolution and understanding of sea freight. And we work collaboratively across all our locations to put sea freight into practice. So for example, right at the moment, we're developing a sea freight or getting ready for a sea freight that's going to go from London to New York for a show in the new year. But you know, on the flip side, then we're working collaboratively with the registrars in New York who will be on the receiving end of that. And we recently ran some training for our sales, artists, teams, and registrars around sea freight. So we're really trying to build that practice into our ways of working. But then on the flip side, I'm also working with a salesperson in New York to help us join the dots across our artist studios so that we can implement some of the practices that we've been evolving in the gallery in artist studios. So that makes up a little bit of what I do and the kind of people I work with at the gallery.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that Hauser Wirth publishes a lot of the information about your role and about sustainability in general on the website.
Yeah, I mean, talking and sharing about all of the practices and things that we're learning is really key to my role and how we want to position environmental sustainability. So at the end of this, hopefully we'll share a link to our sustainability section and you'll be able to read more about the case studies that we have developed and more on the way.
Thank you. And then I'd love to introduce now Edouard. Can you share some background about Convelio and what the company has been doing in terms of sustainable shipping options?
Sure thing. So very briefly about Convelio, we are shipping company that was founded 7 years ago with the goal to essentially bring a bit of innovation to fine art shipping. And we are about 160 people spread between Paris, London, and New York. Over the years, we've tried a lot of different approaches to sustainability, some that have been unsuccessful in the early days, which I'm happy to kind of talk about, and some that have been a bit more successful. In the end, the success linked to this initiative is essentially very much depends on the size of the gallery that we work with. I think the smaller galleries, we essentially try to provide options that I say maybe a bit easier to put in place, and we can go into pretty complex settings for larger ones. But right now, essentially, what is working is probably looking at four kind of initiative, right? Like the first one is around sea freight, as Cliodhna was mentioning as well. This is something we've been doing for a long time. This is something that we're also offering for art fairs. So we essentially working with some art fairs, offering a container, so where we make money essentially on the pickup, on the packing, and on the receiving end with install, but we essentially kind of offer the price of the container. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. I think there is still some work that needs to be done to make sure that there is a bit more maybe proactiveness around getting ready for art fairs, but this is one of the options that we do. The second element that we do is also to try to encourage our client to group as much as possible artworks whenever they are flying via air freight. And I think the one reason why, and we've talked about that case, is essentially if someone ships 11 artworks all at once packed together from, let's say, Paris to New York, that would be, let's say, X tons of CO2. I think it's 600 kilograms of CO2 that would be generated. If you add just one more artwork that you ship kind of last minute, essentially kind of adds 30%. So we're kind of trying to educate some of our clients around last minute shipments, essentially generating quite a lot of CO2 emissions. The third element is more around packaging options, right? So kind of like the use of cardboard, which I'm happy to kind of talk more about. And the last one is more around courier services for lower value artworks, which, because of the nature of courier services being a lot more optimized than air cargo, they tend to also generate a lot less CO2, right? So these are some of the things that are essentially kind of taking off and working pretty well. There are some other things, again, that didn't work so well that I'm happy to talk about.
Mm-hmm. And I know we'll get into some of more of those later, because I know you've brought some really interesting information to share with everybody. So I'm looking forward to that. And then finally, I would love to hear from Haley. Haley, you are an artist and founder of Art into Acres, as well as a co-founder of groups like Artists Commit. Can you share a bit about your artistic practice and explain what Artists Commit does, the tools they offer, in particular, the climate impact reports?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Annabelle. It's such a pleasure to be here with Edouard and Cliodhna and yourself. Annabelle is very humble, but she's really been a leader in our field in terms of journalism, writing, teaching us all, bringing us together. So today is quite a celebration. It's wonderful to hear from Artlogic that there's over 300-400 people present and in signing up, and that there's a lot of registrars. So I think today is going to be very helpful from a registrar perspective. As an artist, I'm interested in what we leave behind. So like legacy, from thought, from action, from community. And so I paint a bit and focus on land conservation, because land conservation is one of these few things that we do now for the long journey. I think another thing we do now for the long journey is education and conversations like this, which bring awareness, which bring new aha moments, and which also like mobilize a sense of ability to act. Because really climate is an awareness issue. We're talking about something, we're talking about gases we can't see, we can't sense with our natural senses. And so things like calculations are key, like Edouard was speaking to. Luckily, I've gotten to work with Cliodhna for a long time now on aspects of the gallery's carbon calculations and also the artist studio practices. And I think from my perspective, at least as an artist, I can see how much of this space is all hands in, and it's about being inclusive, and it's about raising your hand and saying, hey, how do I do this thing? So from a land conservation perspective, I founded Art into Acres about 6 years ago, and after about 15 years of research, and it supports artists, institutions, galleries, and collectors in engaging and funding the very respected and long diligence served land conservation projects of our time, largely through Indigenous stewarded engagements. So with that in mind, Annabelle, did you want screen sharing now or later?
Whenever you think it makes sense.
Okay, so we'll just do it briefly now. With that in mind, I think we're celebrating now at this point, at this nexus in time, a really sort of position wherein there's been quite a lot of different initiatives that are created. Some are gallery worker led, some are artist led. And I'm just going to show a few of those so we have a sense going into this conversation as to the resources that Cliodhna was speaking to and that Annabelle's going to be quoting. Here we are. Okay. For those who are new to PACT, Partners for Arts Climate Targets, this is a great website to visit. You get a sense of a range of initiatives that are supportive for your business and sustainability needs in the arts. And it takes you to the websites, but it also gives you a little bit of a moniker name. Some of them you've heard before if you've attended an Art Switch talk, or if you've worked with Artists Commit on creating a climate impact report for one of your exhibitions. But they're just really great organizations that are supporting learning, which is why we're here today. One of which is the GCC site with the new carbon calculator they just came out with. Very smart. It's a blacklit site to reduce energy consumption. And this is a fantastic resource if you've not already signed up with GCC to be able to use a calculator to calculate your emissions for your shipping needs and your freight. With that in mind, some of the conversation today will move into actual waste, how do we ship, how do we wrap, et cetera. And the Stitch calculator created by Sarah Sutton and colleagues with the National Endowment Grant allows you to actually choose categories of adhesives, solvents, cleaning, fabric, and to compare them. So what does one brand versus another get you in terms of carbon emissions from the waste? Because whenever we throw something away, it degrades and it releases CO2. So waste is actually very important in terms of climate. We'll also talk a little bit today about renewable energy options. And one of the easiest things to do is to sort of go online and look at your access to solar, wind, and other sorts of renewable certified energy. And we will speak about climate impact reports, I think, quite a bit. Lastly, if we talk about strategic climate funds, I'll talk a little bit about Art into Acres and land conservation. And I think we're good there. So those are some sites that are helpful.
Could you, this is actually a great transition. Could you just give a easy overview of what the climate impact reports are?
Absolutely. So climate impact reports, or CIRs, are essentially documents that you make for an exhibition. It was a project that was stewarded beginning in 2021 by Artists Commit, of which I got to co-found. Laura Lupton is really the brain power behind CIRs. And it allows you to focus on one exhibition ahead of time and to really get a sense of thinking about your travel, your waste, your shipping, and to start to look at what are the carbon emissions going to be. You also can look at your hiring practices, but you just focus on one exhibition. And in the container of that exhibition, you learn. You make the report over time and you see what is the climate impact of the exhibition. And then you publish it. And so Artists Commit also publishes those on the Instagram. It's a great way to learn with a very simple tool. And the Tiger Foundation has been wonderful in providing grant funds so you can have a mentor going through that CIR process. Also, you can have funds to support yourself doing it. So highly recommend Artists Commit looking at their CIR options.
Mm-hmm. And Cliodhna, I know that the gallery has done some carbon calculation reports and climate impact reports. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you have learned from those. What could another gallery learn? What tips and takeaways can you share for somebody who might be looking to understand their impact and reduce their impact?
Sure. So I guess, firstly, on the climate impact report side of things, we've looked at that, over the past 3 years on about 2 to 3 exhibitions annually a year. And I think, like Haley says, it's about supporting learning and how to also galvanize team members around specific exhibitions and what they can do. And we've had some consistent work that we've done in our Somerset gallery around exhibitions and working on the climate impact report. So we've been able to see a steady process and shift in practices over the past couple of years. And I think I think with the climate impact reports, that's not necessarily about carbon reduction, but about how do you shift ways of working? And it's more about giving colleagues the tools to ask specific questions. So we've had instances where, you know, we have an art handler who will only make furniture from reused wood or reclaimed wood. Like, we'll never fabricate a new piece of furniture in that gallery, because he understands the waste impacts of that material, and he understands that it's entirely within his own remit to be able to go ahead and do that. And so that's something that we've been able to celebrate internally.
Mm-hmm. Haley, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think one of the first climate impact reports that we ever made was for Pipilotti Wrist at MoCA in Los Angeles. And as Cliodhna is speaking, it reminds me that one of the actions that happened with that was, you know, there was carpet in the exhibition. And in making the report, the exhibition team, the registrars, the installers thought, hey, maybe we can remove that carpet from the waste section and put it in the reuse section. And so a process was taken during the report to find a new home for the carpet. And I think just that thinking through, it's sort of a support to think through. And again, as Cliodhna said, it's much more holistic. It's not just about carbon. It's about just sort of this holistic process. Is how do we do better? And often it creates new relationships. So it's really enjoyable because you start borrowing things from people instead of buying them. And it's a very community process.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And also, I think it might be nice to bring up that there are, you know, at this point, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are networks that exist. Gallery Climate Coalition is one of them, Artist Commit, and there is a peer-to-peer resource sharing website called Barder, BARDER, and that's where people can post anything like plinths, AV equipment, half-used cans of paint, things that otherwise they might not be able to use. So I encourage everyone to check that out. People post things for free or low cost, and it's a great way to essentially remove things from the waste stream. And I also will mention that we will be sharing links and resources after this. So if anyone is a little overwhelmed by the number of things that we're throwing at you, don't worry. And
Annabel, is it worthwhile just adding on the going back a little bit to the carbon question you asked? I think the other resource that I would flag is the Gallery Climate Coalition's sustainable shipping campaign, and for us that was really the starting point for really getting our hands dirty with sea freight. And I think because GCC really socialized that idea and topic, that's how we were able to take it and run with it. And that's how we've been building out our sea freight program, and being able to use their calculator to understand the carbon impact of the decisions that we're taking. So yeah, I think that's a really important learning point within the sector, and I feel like it's influenced a lot of the decisions that we've made internally anyway. And I think the other piece that's come out from that is a big structural shift within the sector around insurance, and the Gallery Climate Coalition, along with everyone who's been asking for sea freight, you know, we've actually shifted the way the fine art insurance industry operates, because prior to this movement, I mean, we had experience of this where our fine art insurers were just not insuring sea freight, but now it's totally possible because they know there's a market for it.
That'd be a great time to bring Edouard back as the representative from a shipping company who they have done a lot to work on this. Edouard, I would love to bring you back in and hear a little bit more about some of the pitfalls that you're finding. I know that insurance companies are providing these resources, shipping companies are also providing resources. But we've also talked about how sometimes galleries are not taking the options that you are providing. Can you share more on how shipping companies can also do their part to encourage best practices and how it can be holistic on both sides?
Of course. And I think first to come back on what Cliodhna and Haley have said, I think they've been like a massive shift over the past, I would say, 5 years when it comes to insurance. I mean, I remember being on a panel in London a couple of years back where we had an insurance company telling the audience that it was not possible to ship art via sea freight. So we've come a long way, and I think that's thanks to some of the initiatives that they've been running, and obviously also thanks to the GCC. So yeah, it's definitely moving in the right direction. I think it's before I talk about the things and that don't work and the pitfalls, I think it's also important to acknowledge that things are moving in the right direction. Now the initial approach, I mean, to talk about some of the things that didn't really take off. Essentially, some of our thinking initially on how to reduce CO2 emissions was kind of looking at what pollutes the most, right? And obviously it's air freight, and we didn't even in the beginning really look at like packaging or even trading, because essentially air freight represents 75% of the emission that are generated on scope 3 by a fine art shipper. And so initially what we've done was offering two things. I mean, one was a green option from a courier company, and namely DHL at the point. So I think we've offered that option for about a good 3 years. Every time we're sending out a quote, I think it's been selected 3 or 4 times over that period.
What is the green option?
A green option is essentially, it's one option from DHL that would use more sustainable aviation fuel, which significantly reduces the emission that are being generated during a flight. And it's essentially not being used because it was a bit more expensive than kind of like the normal service. And so for a significant amount of time after that, we essentially stopped offering it because it was just more work for the team for essentially no conversion. And the other thing that also didn't work out is we built a carbon calculator, and that was also giving the option to clients to compensate for a shipment. So I think if you want to reduce air freight, you need to go sea freight. Most of the time, it's not possible to always go sea freight. You still need to go air freight. So we still wanted to offer a solution to kind of compensate for air freight. And so at the end of each shipment, we would kind of send a link to our clients, and clients would have the possibility to compensate. The problem was that obviously it was asking more money from clients. And not everyone is ready to pay for that. And so essentially the realization after these two initiatives was to say, okay, we essentially need to change approach a little bit and try to offer solutions that are either like on par when it comes from a cost perspective to clients, or that essentially offers them savings. Otherwise, it's unlikely that any of these kind of solution would be adopted. And so that's when we're like, okay, well, we can probably do more on kind of cardboard packing. And they are probably like, now we talk quite a bit about the earth crate of DNA. So that's essentially something that you can find roughly everywhere with any fine art shipping company. It's something that also comes from other industries that actually works really well for lower value artworks, and that would generate something like maybe 90% CO2 reduction when it comes to the CO2 generated for packaging. And so we've essentially started to focus a lot more on the packaging aspect, really trying to push cardboard also because it's cheaper, and therefore like we're really starting to see some adoption here. Sea freight is also something that's actually being used quite a lot. Again, courier companies, like the use of courier companies is becoming a lot more common. I think when we started 7 years ago, there were very few of us using courier companies for lower value artworks that are non-fragile. So and that is really like a solution that actually works really well. That's used heavily, I mean, at galleries of course, but also quite a lot at auction houses. So yeah, I think it's kind of, for us, it was kind of a shift in kind of the way we were approaching some of this. I think obviously we still have the willingness as a fine art shipping company to kind of provide more information to our clients. Cliodhna was mentioning the GCC calculator, which I think is amazing. It's a really good work, but I think, you know, on our website, you can kind of play around with different factors to generate a shipping price. I mean, we should be able to generate also the carbon impact of each one of these options, which is not something that's available yet. That's something that we want to develop over the course of the next 2 years, where essentially you can kind of play around with options and be like, well, if I use cardboard packing, that would generate significantly less CO2 emission than I use a crate, and blah, 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 and essentially kind of use the algorithm structure that we have to generate price and essentially apply that to carbon calculation, so that we can offer kind of real-time information as a registrar takes the decision to use service A or service B, and that they really have kind of the choice essentially to kind of go for the option that generates less carbon emission. And I think at that point, if we take that approach, at least that's, I posted this right now, then that's something that we have to test. is to say, well, even if a service is more expensive, but I give clients the ability to see that, I don't know, it's going to generate 50% more carbon emissions, then I think it's likely that registrar can go back to the head registrar or to the gallery director and say, well, you know, we have these two options. Our recommendation is that we go for the one that generate less CO2 emission, or that maybe they can go back to the client and offer this kind of option. So I think that's the direction that we need to take. And I think that's the direction also that the fine art shipping companies in general need to move towards.
Mm-hmm. And I think you raised a really important point as well, is that it's not just about offering these solutions, it's about explaining why they're important. And also that's a tool that someone at a gallery can use to go back to whoever, whether it's the owner of the gallery or it's the collector or a museum, and say, sure, this could be a more expensive option to take a greener option, but it also reduces the carbon footprint by X, and some of those numbers can be pretty dramatic. And this actually raises, Haley, I was going to bring you into this because I think, you know, something that you also offer is consulting and helping people understand these decisions. So do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I wanted to, when the resources go out, it'd be great for Cliodhna's white paper on shipping to be sent. And that white paper is very instructive. Like the artist Tauba Arbach and her studio reached out and they wanted some support on the sustainability of her show that was going to be opening in Kassel, Germany. And we looked directly to that white paper and asked Cliodhna for advising on looking at that. And now the museum in Kassel is doing all of their shipments by sea after getting that experience. So I think it's really amazing how, you know, you can act and then you can share and you become, like, as Josh Klein says, a force multiplier. Because it's really, it's an inclusive space, sustainability. It's like sort of everyone. And if we don't all do it, it's not going to be effective. So I love this notion that, you know, it makes ripples. With that in mind, also, I think, as Edouard is saying, this notion of carbon budgets, you know, you don't just have a financial budget when you go into a project, but you also sort of think, what is my carbon budget going to be? And I know Hauser Wirth has a lot of experience trying to create carbon budgets, which is sort of like an upper limit as to the amount of emissions you're going to release for an activity. So maybe you send less staff, or a curator travels less often, but stays longer. And these things are going to become more and more commonplace in our language. In terms of consultants, you know, there's so many people who want to support, and I think Artist Commit's a great engagement. As an artist, I started offering pro bono carbon calculations to museums and art institutions and galleries, like, for their first time. And after doing that for 2 years, everything from the Guggenheim to a small museum in Seattle to a young gallery, the Tiger Foundation came in and they supported my time for the next 2 years. So the most recent one we finished was actually for the Met Museum for their full year of 2023 for all their exhibitions. And you just really learn a lot from engaging. But I think with anything we do, we're busy with other things too. So it's important that this can be sustainable, that sustainability can be sustainable. And I find personally, for one way to make it sustainable for me is I focus on one thing. Like, I make one change. And usually it's a change that, as a registrar or as a curator or as an artist, you actually feel a kinship with. You're like, oh, I'm really interested in composting, or I'm really interested in not wrapping my painting of trees in plastic, right? Like, I make paintings of places that I'm working on supporting the conservation of. And so wrapping it like a ton of plastic is a challenge. And so this earth crate is a great option, right? This notion that you can use cardboard and then you can recycle it on the curb rather than shipping by wooden crate.
That's actually a really important thing to bring up, that you can make small changes that can improve, that can work towards a broader shift. I think that's something that a lot of galleries, small nonprofit teams, museums say is, we don't have the resources to do a whole systems overhaul. And it shouldn't be about that. Certainly it would be great if that's what it works towards, but I'd love to know from all of you, if you can just think of a few easy tips. One that you brought up with me, Haley, was the ICA Miami's shipping decisions, and then if Cliodhna and Edouard, if you can also think of like an easy tip. But Haley, I don't know if you want to start with one.
Yeah, happy to start. So there's an article coming out soon by Annabel, which I'm very much looking forward to in the art newspaper.
Out already.
Okay, thank you. That it focuses on support, consulting, and engagement within the sector. And in that, the ICA Miami really focused with her on their shift in shipping. So in doing the work and doing some of their inquiry as a team, like they really worked as a great team, they looked at seeing how they could ship better. And one of the things they decided was that they would wait for a full truck. Like, let's say they acquired a new painting in LA. They wouldn't just ship it when it was ready. They would wait for a full truck before they moved from one city to the next. And that has such an exceptional reduction on carbon emissions. So that's a great example, is thinking about getting your shipments full.
Mm-hmm. And Edouard and Cliodhna, do you have any like easy tips about how people can approach this?
I mean, from my perspective, one of the things that I was reflecting on and the kind of journey that I've been on with many of my colleagues, I think there's lots of information out there, and those who want to kind of tap into it are able to tap into it, and we'll be sharing some of those resources afterwards. But I also think there's an element of bravery that's required here for colleagues to try different things. So for example, there's an art handler that I've been working with in London who has developed this reusable, in our London gallery, who's developed this reusable packaging solution. But he's really had to raise his head above the parapet to get other art handlers interested and to encourage colleagues to use it, because, you know, change is hard, and I think we need to recognize that. But that's kind of what this work really does require, is like a bit of a nudge in a slightly different direction. And I think a little bit back to what Haley was saying, I think really one of the biggest motivators in this kind of environmental sustainability space within the art world is this collegial element. And I think that really does cut through the usual competitive approaches within the art world. And that really does have quite a lot of untapped potential. And I hope that colleagues in other galleries who want to take a step in this kind of direction towards environmental sustainability could be inspired by that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And Edouard, did you have a tip to share as well?
Yeah, I think, I mean, maybe two tips. I mean, we prepared that one pager that we're happy to share as well, but essentially two things. I think something you said, which was really important, is that it's never all or nothing. And the reason why I say that is we've had at least quite a lot of our clients coming to us and say, well, we're not exactly going to try to do anything because we know we cannot do much, right? But the reality is we can take really small steps. What's important is like it's small steps that are consistent, and that you do one step, or like you change one process for 1 year and then you add another thing the other year, and then, you know, over time it compounds and can generate significant savings. So I think it's like whatever step you take as a company, whether you're a gallery, an auction house, a museum, a foundation, doesn't matter. I think what's important is to get started. And yeah, sometimes we can, you know, be so much taken into the day-to-day that we just forget to do that. So that would be kind of the first one. The second one, I mean, we've talked about packaging and so on. So maybe just to focus on is like the concept of consolidation, right? So what Haley was mentioning is that as soon as you consolidate, and it's quite true for I mean, it's obviously true for any freight method, but it's particularly important when it comes to air freight, because air freight is so polluting in comparison to road freight and sea freight, that if you don't consolidate, like as soon as you're going to, I mean, if you send things one by one, like you're essentially going to explode your carbon budget if you have one, but you're going to explode the CO2 emission that you're generating. And I think that's why, specifically kind of going back to the concept of air courier, you know, I think there are a lot of solutions that are available now to ship things via courier if you want to ship individual artworks. If you're shipping like essentially like a set of artwork, you can definitely use air cargo, which I think is traditionally what the art market has done. If you want to ship, you have to ship something kind of last minute, and it's something that is, let's say, below 100,000 pounds, which is not overly fragile, let's say a painting, you can pack it in a way which is protective enough that can kind of go through air courier, and is going to be a lot more optimized by default than air cargo. And by kind of taking these small steps, you will reduce the carbon emission that you're generating. So I think kind of these two things, essentially kind of just getting started and consolidating. And then if you really cannot consolidate, kind of considering alternative freight method is something that's, I would say I would focus on as kind of first steps.
I know we are approaching the time to open up for questions, but I'd also just like to invite any last minute, last comments. And I think I'd like to highlight something that we keep coming back to, which is empowering everybody to know that we should ask these questions, know that there are resources available. But also, I really do hope that people who are asking these questions feel supported by the people that they work with and work for. This is an ecosystem that has to work together. And, we've just mentioned some small tips. There are also huge things that people can do. Then there are resources available for that. There are grants available. Helen Frankenthaler Foundation's climate initiative, if institutions are interested in doing overhauls of their energy. Haley's mentioned the Tiger Foundation several times. They are a great curator specific grant that also has a climate action for curators specific program. And all of these things that we're mentioning, they are all very Googleable. I know Artlogic is going to share like a roundup after this. And then we are all open for questions, but I would like to first invite any last minute thoughts that anyone wanted to raise before we dive into the questions.
I guess just one quick, sorry, Haley, one quick one. And really the place to start is to look at, and Haley kind of touched on it, but look at your energy contracts, because as a gallery globally, we've been able to reduce our emissions by over 60% in energy through, no, actually 80% by shifting to renewable contracts. And that's huge. But that's all just about like how you set the organizational priorities.
I really appreciate Cliodhna saying that, because that was exactly what I was going to say. This morning I was taking my vitamins and I looked at the bottom of the box and it says, we use certified renewable energy. And I was like, we talk about one thing today, we should talk about renewable energy, because it really depends where you are and your provider. It's all different. So we can't give one standardized piece of advice, but you just go online and you sort of see, how can I shift? And you don't have to shift your company usually. Usually you can like buy a different blend within, for example, the company you still get the Con Edison bill, for example. But really shifting to renewable energy, where my studios, I usually do an outdoor studio. So I don't really use energy in the studio, but in the winter I have to charge my computer and I buy local solar, and that feels great. But I think, Annabel, like you really underscored it, where it's, be curious and ask questions. And this needs to be inclusive. Everyone needs to be able to engage. So I feel empowered to do so, because I think the welcome you'll receive from the different initiatives you propose within your business or within your institution will actually just make you more inspired where you work.
Yeah. I guess
Edouard,
the other thing I would also just add very quickly is that I get lots of questions from people working in other galleries and fairs and museums, and I always make time to help people start on the journey, and so that they can, so open for questions if people have them. Also offline if we need to.
And I think my only comment to kind of close this is, as Haley and Cliodhna were mentioning, is asking questions. And ask questions to your fine art shipping company. We're not the only ones to do this. I think a lot of fine art, I would say probably all fine art shipping companies now are very aware of these issues. And I would say most of them now have solutions that they can offer that would help you kind of get started to reduce emission on shipping. So yeah, feel free to come talk to us. Feel free to come go to speak to your fine art shipping companies. Like, it's very likely they would be able to offer a solution that would essentially fit your initial targets at the very least.
And John, I would love to pass it over to you to ask some of the questions that have been coming up from the audience.
Well, the first question is for yourself and Haley. And it's about, is there a database with data on the carbon footprint or environmental impact of the entire art sector, including galleries, museums, art fairs, artists, all combined into one?
So the short answer is no. There is no entire understanding of the impact of the industry. There are estimates. Julie's Bicycle, which is a UK-based charity, they work with arts, music, performing arts, all different kind of cultural and arts industries to help reduce their carbon footprint. They did a study based off of several different case studies. Some studios like Studio Olafur Eliasson, they worked with Gallery Climate Coalition, and they did do an estimate of the annual impact of, I think it was 2022, and I don't have the number off the top of my head. So there are some smaller reports, there are some estimates, but we don't at the moment know the exact precise carbon footprint. But I don't know if Haley or others want to chime in.
From the back end, from doing carbon calculations pro bono for all these years, I've seen reductions. So I know, like, okay, this is one studio for the year. And I think you also like learn where the major pie pieces are, which is really your air freight or your air travel. Anytime anything leaves the ground, I mean, the numbers balloon, and your energy, which is why the Helen Frankenthaler Climate Initiative came forward to like help people green their energy source, reduce their energy consumption, because also energy is expensive. So it helps on two fronts, saving money and saving emissions. There hasn't been a comprehensive total, in part because actually it's really hard to calculate. For example, what is the carbon footprint of a laptop? So it's been advised that we have three types of carbon, and this is probably getting too into the weeds, but you have scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and scope 1 and scope 2 are your fuel, like your fuel and your electricity. So those are easier to calculate because you bring forward your utility bills. Scope 3 is everything else. It's your panini for lunch, right? It's the table you're working on. In some companies, like if you go more into the corporate world and you talk about a shoe company, their scope 3 is usually 90% of their carbon footprint. But again, hard to calculate. So really what we focus on is reduction, and those are the numbers we do know. For example, Gary Hume did a 2019 exhibition where he focused on sea freight, one of the early adopters from an artist perspective, and he reduced his carbon emissions for that exhibition by 96%. So I think we know the reduction numbers, but the total number, one day we will know when we have finer calculators, but we don't at the present.
I mean, I think just that report that you referred to, Annabel, that they do say that the carbon footprint of the art world, that includes museums, galleries, auction houses, is about equivalent to that of the country of Austria. So I think that helps just put it into some kind of scalable context.
Mm-hmm.
Well, another tidbit is I heard recently that the carbon footprint of Microsoft is equivalent to the country of Sri Lanka. So if we're talking in country scales, that's pretty large, Cliodhna.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the next question is, what are your thoughts on using electric trucks for ground shipping? And if that isn't currently in play at the moment, when will that be coming?
I think I can answer this one. This is becoming more and more common. As a matter of fact, I know already quite some companies are using electric trucks that we work with, primarily for local deliveries. We are also in the UK soon changing our trucks to electric trucks for deliveries within London. We are taking 2 new ones in Paris that should arrive by March. So I think the whole industry, and to be very clear, we are not the only ones to do that. I think a lot of companies are kind of looking in that direction. I think it's like, it would be impossible. It would be very challenging to only work with electric trucks simply for more kind of like the fine art shuttles, because that would require the trucks to kind of stop and recharge, which would take a significant amount of time. Maybe mindsets will change over time and that will become kind of more possible. But I think definitely for local deliveries, this is not something that's coming, it's something that's happening. And I would say every fine art shipping company is looking at that at the moment.
Yeah, from our perspective, we, like in New York, we for a lot of our last mile deliveries, they're going by electric trucks in and out of the city. But it's also like the technology is evolving all the time on that front.
I think what's really key with electric trucks is where the electricity is being sourced from. So if you're getting your electricity from solar or from wind, that's a great improvement. If you're getting your electricity from coal, I've heard that it's pretty much a flip with gas. So when you do get an electric car or truck, then there's sort of this next step of shifting your energy provider, which is what Cliodhna brought up earlier.
100%. And I think quite a lot of us financial companies are switching to renewable energy when it comes to their contract. So I think that's something that's been talked about quite a lot in the industry. I mean, probably not everyone. I think that's definitely worth mentioning it as well in general, but I believe this is something that's happening more and more.
Yeah, and I think what's also interesting, Edouard, what we've seen with a lot of the agents that we work with is because they tend to run large warehouses for storage, they're also putting solar on top of the storages, right? So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, which is really powerful and significantly reduces the carbon footprint. So yeah, 100%.
So the next question is, what do you all as panelists think about reusable crates such as Rockerbox or Turtle? Will they positively affect sustainability principles, do you think?
I'm happy to start as well on this. So we've had a look at the solutions several times over the course of the past 7 years. My opinion, I mean, which is data backed, I don't have the data here, but I could find it out again, was that it's absolutely great for local deliveries, right? So if it's like intra-London, intra-New York, intra-Paris, I mean, as soon as it's essentially kind of traveling via road freight and that it's easy to bring back the crate to where it originated, I think it makes a huge amount of sense. And they are like also soft packing. I think they are like soft packing solutions like I'm forgetting the name. I think it's Quavat, something like this that we've been
yeah.
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 That we've been using as well here in Paris for some art fairs. I think now when it comes to air freight, I mean, yeah, it's not worth it. And it's not worth it for several solutions, according to the calculation that we've done. One is because essentially the crates always tend to be kind of bigger than the size of the artwork, and it's much more difficult to kind of really cater the size of the crate to the size of the artwork. And what that means essentially is that on the freight side, I mean, on the kind of road freight side, to bring the item to the airport, then to flight, essentially, and then on the last mile element, you will essentially ship air, which is extremely expensive from a CO2 perspective. And then also most of the volumes are essentially leaving from Europe going into the US, at least for us. And what that means is we would essentially end up with a huge amount of like these crates that would end up in the US, and then you have to bring them back. So even if you kind of use sea freight to bring them back, you essentially generate additional CO2. Now I know that Rockbox has kind of this loop mechanism now where you can essentially kind of exchange crates with companies that have kind of different logistic kind of flows within the country, which I think is good. I think what's kind of missing for me here is, I mean, ideally you would need to have Rockbox, Turtle, and kind of any alternative that are kind of working together in making that more reusable. But I think kind of at least what we see from, again, it's our perspective and it might be linked to our business, is like we have a lot of the similar kind of flows that essentially leave mostly for one place and kind of going to a specific place. And then it means you accumulate crates in one place and you have to bring them back. So yeah, I think for, let's say, intercontinental shipments, I don't think this is worth it. But again, absolutely great when it comes to local delivery.
I think also it's interesting is sometimes you have artist generated shifts in registration. So for example, the artist Helen Mira, who currently lives in Muir Beach, California, on her website, you can find a rider. So when she engages in exhibitions, she sends the rider ahead of time and she says like, hey, I don't want my work packed in plastic, or I want it to be shipped in a certain way. And I think it just really depends on what one makes. But as an artist, I decided I didn't want my work to go in crates, and so therefore, and I didn't want to have like a lot of air freight weight. So I make small paintings. So sometimes like one thing can inform another. But you really just start at home. And I think every change you make, as has been said, adds up. The big thing that adds up is sharing it with your colleagues and writing a little memo about it and putting it on your Instagram and writing a blog post. And if Annabel calls for a story, like, you know, responding with facts, because that's where really the community drive comes forward and we can learn from each other's. And I think that white paper we spoke about with shipping is a great example. And now you have a museum in Germany that's shifting their shipping because they were familiarized by someone they felt like, okay, I can trust her experience. I'm going to proceed. So really like the sharing and caring aspect, like that nurturing aspect is really big in this space.
I think the other piece with reusable crates, I think it's also just we also just need examples of how we make sustainability real within the art world. And okay, these solutions might not be perfect, but they're the start of conversations about how you might do it. So I think that's also why they're important innovations in the ways we're working.
So our next question has to do with food. Do you advise galleries, art fairs, and institutions that how do you advise galleries and institutions about how they serve, sell, use plant-based food, no meat, fish, or dairy for their events? Or do you not address food at all with kind of how you view climate change or sustainability?
I mean, food is so central. So about a month ago, we did a symposium on climate at MoCA in Los Angeles. And what was interesting is all the speakers were not from the art space. And one gentleman, Peter, was from NASA. And he really broke it down. And it's probably not this direct, but he sort of said 80% of climate change is fuel, like fossil fuels, our energy, our transport, and 20%, I think he used the word cows. But food is really essential. And I can just say one tip is like looking at what you serve at a dinner, whether it's a gala or a group dinner. But if you can shift it to plant-based, the emissions factor, I'm not sure quite what it is, but I've heard things like 100 times, is really impactful.
Mm-hmm. And I'll also point to several of the climate impact reports, which are listed publicly on Artist Commit's website. They often do address food, especially if it's like a big museum show, if there's a big dinner, they address things like that. I'd also point to, and I'm only pointing to this because I was just reading about it, Art Basel, Miami Beach, because it takes place in a LEED certified, I think it's silver building. They have to adhere to certain standards. And so the fair has to use the vendors that the building uses, and they are also taking into consideration the food sources. So the answer to that is yes, and I think that it's a really important part of this conversation.
And then just because we've got running out of time, we'll have our final question, which has a few points to it. So bear with me as I read it out. But what is your vision for the future of fine art logistics? Do you foresee any major challenges? And do you think it's a responsibility of the larger galleries, museums, and institutions to pave the way for these innovations to come?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And this verticalization, like really actually just making innovations within the field, are so helpful. And I think one of the examples we talked about was Earthcrate. I know Boski Gallery has CCC, climate conscious contributions. They do a bit of money for each work that's sold, and they do that as their donation to their strategic climate funds. Making these like innovations is everything.
I think it's also interesting to define what the responsibility is of these larger institutions, whether that's, if you're asking if it's a financial responsibility or what it is. I think one really important example is what we've touched on a few times is the transparency of these issues and the transparency of the work being done. Again, I mentioned Hauser Wirth's website, GCC's website, Artist Commit website. These are people who have use the resources of these institutions to undertake studies, to do these reports, and they are available online for people to read and to understand. So I think that the resource sharing is happening from all parts of the industry. I think that thinking about the future of climate action and sustainable logistics in general, I think one of the biggest issues will be funding. Which is why I really do believe that more grants and awards need to exist. Whether that comes from bigger institutions, I don't know, but I think that will be a roadblock for a lot of people to move forward.
Yeah, and I think on that front, I mean, there's already there are more funds available in the US than there are in Europe and the UK at the moment. So you can already see a kind of differing approach in those two places. But yeah, I think 100% there is a bigger onus on larger galleries and institutions to pave the way. But I think we also learn from each other. And, you know, Kate McGarry Gallery is another excellent example. She's done so much work in this space and has, you know, she's really put so many of these practices in place, and her whole team like fully understand it. So I think, you know, I think it happens at various different scales depending on interest levels and how people want to engage.
I think that's a really good point, is like the engagement, interest level, and then what is your impetus? And you see different galleries, Charles Moffat, Mickey Mang, they do percentages of their annual net to nonprofits that work in the space of climate and legal justice and environmental support. And also you'll see like artists partnering with their galleries for an idea, like, hey, how about we have this work go to benefit? So again, innovation, sometimes starting small, just starting local with you and one other person coming up with an idea, and then and doing it, and then reflecting, and then doing something else, I think is really how we're going to change the field. And once, as Edouard is saying, once you make these changes, they're iterative, but then you've made them and you're working now in a new direction. You're sort of pivoting.
Yeah, and I think the maybe only thing I would have said, maybe more from a pure fine art shipping company perspective, is I think where the big galleries and institutions can help is also educating a little bit the client around kind of what are the options that are available to you and where it makes sense maybe to take. I mean, ideally now, again, our approach is to make sure that it's either at costs or like we can offer something which is at cost or even cheaper, but sometimes they can be kind of more expensive, slightly more expensive option, like the green options I was discussing before, using more safe aviation fuel. I mean, it's kind of, okay, what is the impact if you actually ship with that option rather than this one? Like, and at scale, us as fine art shipping companies, we should be able to innovate to kind of provide this kind of different level of carbon emission for each options. And I think at that point, it can kind of strike a conversation even for like a sales director at a gallery to be like, well, you have these two shipping options, we recommend you take this one. Because you will, like, maybe it's, I don't know, $200 more expensive, but at the end of the day, you generate significantly less carbon emission. I think that's something where I think galleries and institutions are like in the like front seats in terms of like being able to kind of educate collectors around these important initiatives.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to the entire panel. Thank you to our moderator, Annabel, and our panelists, Haley, Edouard, and Cliodhna, and for the wonderful insights on how we can all work towards a more sustainable art world. There have been a lot of questions also if we can get the links out to you that were shared in this talk, so we will definitely try and get that out to everybody that attended so you can use all of those resources that were shared. Please do join us for an hour, for our next session, which is Beyond Election Day Macro Challenges Facing the Art Market, where our panel will discuss and look at strategies and insights of kind of how we can cope with the uncomfortable macroeconomic conditions, larger cultural trends, and technological advances that are poised to impact art trade today and tomorrow. Once again, thank you so much to our entire panel. It's been a fascinating talk on how the art world become more sustainable. We look forward to seeing you in an hour in our final session. Thank you all.